on a cell, but I on Wi-Fi. There we go.
You may, sometimes the cell service is better.
Right.
Anyways, hi, welcome everybody. We can wait for people to come on and say hi, but Dane, I've got a question that I guess I didn't even ask you about is what's your opinion of this UDAF proposal that's come out?
Well, what specifically? What specifically from the Utah Department of Agriculture?
Their recommendation that about sales of hemp flower in Utah?
I haven't actually been able to. So much has kind of been moving around personally for me that actually within the last couple of weeks, I haven't been able to stay up on as much of it as I'd like. And I'm going to be needing to roll right back into that. So why don't you kind of elaborate a little bit on it for me and I'll kind of let you know what I think.
I'll share it with you. My understanding is that that you're no longer allowed to sell hemp flower outside of Utah. Sure. Hi, Shane. Good morning. And then with the DEA change for total THC, including Delta 8 now, changes, I think, some of the limitations. And I believe that there was a change within, and I'm not very smart on this. Like I said, I don't want to misquote because I surround myself with people that know much better than me, and I don't want to put bad information out there. But my understanding is that it makes it pretty tricky around the processing piece.
Right.
And then the hard to transportation. If you're over 0.3 total you don't get a transportation license anymore.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, the more that you try to define something, you're also going. The more you try to define it to try to standardize it, you're also going to kind of box certain things out at the same time. So, one of the things that, as any industry that's growing, it's going to realize is that as you create a standard for something, you're going to automatically push something else out. And so you kind of need to create the standard for what the alternative is as well. Because you can't just have the gray area anymore. You have to have an opinion on it. So, what is the 0.3 exactly? Now they're adding Delta 8, which my personal opinion, I don't even know what to think about that in terms of consumer products. I don't know how I necessarily feel about it. It hasn't been around long enough. And it's one of those things. There's so much rapidly changing right now. And so obviously, there's also a lot of talk about the federal government kind of having some change this fall in terms of their opinion. So it's almost, I think the most important thing really is to just kind of, for everyone to keep focusing on what it is they're doing correctly, and keep doing that, at least during this time of rapid change. Because if you're trying to pivot with the change of everything, you might miss your mark, right? So just keep doing your thing and you'll at least kind of have a better idea of where you might come out in the end.
So I think that I'm actually going to set up a time and go down and talk with Cody and UDAF, and just so that I can understand what these rules mean, what the stipulations are. But from my understanding, it's a big education piece, even just keeping up on these changes, knowing what they mean. I think this is a good example. This was from my understanding, there's a lot of people in our industry that are pretty concerned or worried about what these new rules mean, the regulations mean, as far as them being able to sell, especially any of our hemp farmers.
Right.
What are they allowed to sell and what are they allowed to do? Who are they allowed to sell? If they can't sell it inside Utah and they can no longer sell it outside of Utah. The
big thing is that hemp flower. So you got to look at also the culture that we live in. It's similar to smoking. Smoking anything is frowned upon. So it just, whether it's cigarette, I mean, if the state could get rid of cigarettes, they would. So I don't see, we need to understand the environment that we're working in and kind of appreciate that, and at least really be appreciative of the fact that we still have medical cannabis flower, and let's kind of start with that and really also try to peel that back in terms of the medical products and helping people to really, educate and be more educated in terms of the true difference between hemp flower and medical cannabis flower or marijuana, as police officers like to try to mislabel it. And so I think a lot of it also comes down to law enforcement education is a big part.
Yeah, I do have to say though, I'm a little bit concerned about the I guess I wouldn't even say concerned. I'm interested in learning about the effects of what it will have, and curious about the effects on the market long term when we're putting caps without education. If it is an education piece for our law enforcement to understand the difference between hemp flower and cannabis, can we implement resources instead of just saying, we're done, we're not going to do it at all?
Right. I mean, that'd be the ideal thing to do. Obviously, until we get to that point, you have two aspects at play. You have the side of the government that's trying to regulate everything so that it can be safe and quality controlled for the end consumer, and then you have the pressure of the public, of the consumer, saying we would need this yesterday. And so that's what makes it really hard to be able to be doing things in kind of a more controlled fashion in that sense. That's why I think ultimately the biggest hurdle isn't the number of licenses that we have or the licensing process. It's the education piece. So we need more universities and institutions of higher learning and post-secondary education involved with the cannabis space of all kinds. So not just things like certification training for your state or industry practice training. It needs to start getting into the university level. It needs to start adapting into the technology and the agricultural sectors of trade and of school. It needs to be accessed as a form of just a regular job too. 2-year degrees. Once it gets to that point, it'll be so normalized, I think, that it will kind of have a little bit better of an idea. So it needs to kind of also engage with the individual's ability to learn more about this plant as well, not just us as people saying, okay, everyone else needs to learn about this more. Okay, what can we do in order to learn about this more? So
Sure. Well, and I think a lot of it comes down to accessibility and knowing where that's at, right? It's part of my goal in creating a platform like this is that we have a one-stop shop to get information and to go to learn about COA, to learn about what your how to get into the industry, to learn about where to go to get those resources or to find those things. When we talk about like regulations and rules, real quick, where do you see an immediate change in? I'm going to back up. You said earlier when we were talking that we're in Utah and really being wise of what our culture is when we're creating business. This is something that I kind of ride a fine line with because I'm very passionate about the industrial hemp industry and really because I see so much of an opportunity for it here in Utah. Right? Utah is, because of the regulations and because of the culture that we have, it's still the same plant. It's still cannabis, but it's hemp, right? And we're approaching it at a different angle. Okay. So now, because we don't have very much time, I'm going to dig real quick. I hear you're getting ready to kind of change roles or explore something new and find a new job. How do people get into new roles, and how did you find your job, or how did you find your new role? And can you talk about it a little bit, about what you're going to be doing?
Yeah. So I can actually officially say that I'll be starting over at the Dragonfly team, kind of doing some of the compliance work with them. Awesome. What that amounted to, or how that came about ultimately, and I think what can be said is it's a good way for anyone to really enter the industry or get that job or whatever it is to obviously take what you've already applied outside of anything, outside of the cannabis industry, and then try to apply it inside. And just really try to do something with that and be recognized for that. So I created a training program, a training and certification program for the state for cannabis agents, and that just over time, we got enough of their agents certified and registered with the state, and just had a good connection with them. They're a great team. They kept coming back for questions and really just engaged with the ability to say, okay, what is this individual doing? And I think they saw the fact that obviously that initiative, what is it that is going to take an individual from the comfort of, quote, the status quo and move into this space?
The leader.
Yeah, exactly. So every individual moving into this space is a leader, and is a leader of some kind, whether it's down to being a master of the self, which is probably the most rare individual there is, to someone who can actually inspire others. So it really just takes taking what you're good at and then moving forward with it into that space, and really just driving and connecting with other people around you, obviously, and making friends, obviously, over your ability to make that next profit or make that next dollar, right?
Sure.
Making those next 10 connections is going to pay off far, far, far greater in the long run.
Well, and figuring out where you have value add, right? What do you do for them, and what do you do, and jobs, and here, well, what do you need, or how can I help connect you? I need forward thinking people. This industry is very forward thinking. When you said everybody in this industry pretty much is leaders, I had another guest last week say everybody on this show is passionate. That, Mandy, you've cried twice on this show, but sure. It really is. This industry brings a lot of very passionate people, and those that aren't, they seem to weed themselves out a little bit, right? Because it's tricky being in the industry and it being only about the job.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's difficult to try to obviously build something that you need capital, you need money in order to continue your operations, to live your daily life, whatever. However, when that is lost in when that's lost obviously the plant and the reason why we're doing this is lost to that, even to our own, essentially our mortal nature, it can become a little tricky at times. So just always remembering to put quite honestly, putting the plant above, everything else, because it can provide. So if you remember that, then it'll take its time. Ultimately, I think a lot will change over the next few decades, though.
Oh, for sure. It already absolutely
is, but yeah.
Well, and I think it's going to get harder before it gets easier, right? Mm-hmm. We're getting ready to disrupt some industries and create new industries that threaten a lot of existing companies and a lot of existing practices. And so, same reason that hemp and cannabis were illegal or pushed out, it's going to take a whole group, that's trying to keep it out again, try to really fight.
On that, real quick, one of the things to kind of tie back to a question that you were saying is Utah could be a real leader in this. And with that, the regulatory aspect that you were talking about, one thing that people tend to forget is, a lot of the regulation is tied to the chemical compositions that can essentially alter our state of consciousness. Now, hemp or cannabis has a whole other aspect to it that there's almost no regulations to it that can be overcome, and they're highly profitable, and they're in dire need for not just our local economy, but the global economy as well. One of the things people tend to forget is Utah's largest exporter is Hong Kong. The biggest thing that they buy is our food. So we should be producing hemp for food in the masses and selling it back to them. Because currently we're buying subpar hemp food products from Asia or China. So why aren't we creating them here and selling them to them instead?
Okay, so when we talk about supply chains and jobs, you're hitting on this is what has become my core passion, right? This is my why, because it's disturbing when I find out that 90 something % of our nation's fabrics are imported from other countries, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk about Utah's alfalfa export and how much water we're exporting to South Korea or to Hong Kong or wherever, right? But the capability that we have to really revitalize our state, my concern is, what does the regulation what happens when you play with regulations from state to state and the manufacturing of hemp? Are you talking industrial hemp, or are you talking manufacturing of hemp and extraction and distillates and
right?
All of the above? Because
so ultimately what we have more of right now is the latter, right? And so I think what people should be maybe doing is starting to dive into more of the industrial side of things. Yes, the textile fibers, the food aspect of this plant as well. The fact that it can grow on using less water means that we wouldn't be exporting our water across the ocean to another country, essentially, because you got to use water to grow that food.
Oh, yeah.
So I think,
and we're already a drought state. We're already high altitude. It's already, water rights are a hard thing here. It's something that's fought after. When we talk about like our supply chains, it is my goal in our committees that we've put together, in our steering committees, to fix these supply chains and put them together. That we put a manufacturing facility in, that we can break down our fiber and into the 4 different types of fiber so that it can be sold for food or textiles or plastics or construction material, and then have a facility that manufactures textiles or construction material or fabrics, and then can be sold back into our state, right? So we're growing and producing and manufacturing, as well as through our inland port and all of our transportation abilities, being able to ship all of our product as well as other product out of here, right? We are a manufacturing state with huge transportation abilities.
Right. And huge agricultural abilities as well. I mean, that's a huge aspect of our industry, is agriculture, and primarily the beef industry as well. So, it's going to take pushing against a lot of things, right? A lot of interests that are out there. However, just because one does well doesn't mean the other has to go away. You mentioned the fact that Utah has hard-fought water rights, and that's kind of that's a well-known thing out here. And so that's state by state as well.
Yeah.
That's no different than cannabis is now or will be in the future. So ultimately, it will still come down to a state's opinion and the cultural opinion of the people around you. There's still dry counties in the nation where you can't have alcohol, and I'm sure there's people that live there that hate it, and then I'm sure there's people there that love it.
Well, there's even tribes now that are banned.
Family members that still think prohibition should probably be a thing. So it's one of those things where it just takes, it's a conversation it's not going away. And I think what we're starting to recognize is that on that thread of it being similar to water rights, this idea of cannabis not just being an industry, but being a true resource that's able to help vitalize an economy and give wealth back to the people that are generating the production of that product, is something that's kind of sleeping, and people are waiting to find their way in on it. And so what it really takes is people just hopping in on it. I mean, last year we had a world of alfalfa farmers try to hop in on cannabis production. and we lost maybe about half of them over the year just because it became kind of a non-profitable thing for them. They didn't really know what they were doing, whatever. So yeah, it's don't give up and just get back out there and try it again, especially for the rural communities of Utah, that really could use a means to revitalize their communities. Yeah, and a true resource.
So when we talk about
something that helps,
I have a lot of rural community and people reach out that say, hey, I want to find a way that we can keep our kids here when we graduate. I want to give job opportunities. The opportunity that hemp brings to open up countless industries. Earlier you said this isn't just an industry. Hemp is unlike any other product. It's in every single industry, in all of the verticals. If you're in automotive, if you're in electronics, if you're in education, if you're in if you're in manufacturing, legal, anything, absolutely anything, and no other product is like that. And so I think you said it well, that hemp isn't an industry that's going to revitalize. It's a resource. It's a resource to revitalize every other industry. And I think low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, are textiles and construction material.
Absolutely. Especially with the demand of those two things, as we have a growing population, right?
Yeah.
So we have a demand for building out our infrastructure and we need to clothe our people, and that also could just be done by changing our outlook in terms of what we need, is my opinion to that. We don't necessarily be buying seasonal fashion. However, we will need shelter and food always. So those are two sectors that I think can always be appreciated and fully driven forward with technology and advancement of ideas.
Well, and fashion's never going to go away, right? However,
absolutely not.
When we talk about what we're putting on our body, that's what's really been eye-opening to me. When we talk about what's your aha moment and what really bought you in. I had a young lady on our show one day talking about how, cotton is something like 40% of the world's pesticides, or 30% of the world's pesticides that are soaked in your cotton. And then you take your clothes home and what are you wearing? You're wearing all these pesticides, just the exact same. It's just something I hadn't thought of. Or the antimicrobial factor, or the steam factor that comes with it when we talk about like bedding or construction material for safety or fire retardant, or
I think, the two main areas where I think the fibers could help probably the most are textiles, but more importantly, the amount of cardboard and plastic that we use as a society could be completely mitigated by this resource. So,
polyester,
gaining the technology to learn how to better make those products.
Well, and that all of the synthetic fabrics that we're wearing they're made out of plastic. They're made out of the same thing as these plastics are. Justin had to give you a shout out here. He really wishes he could pull off the mohawk the same way you can. I love it. My boys wore mohawks when they were little, and in kindergarten we lived in Saratoga Springs, and they got kicked out of school until they shaved their head or had a different haircut to come back.
Oh, and that's a whole other sector of my life that I have an opinion about that needs to change. So, education, absolutely. And I think cannabis education can actually be an aspect that helps direct the difference in the education system as well, because it has the ability to say, this is different. It's a different group of people. It's a different mindset, and it needs to be approached differently. Just look at every single early, late 90s, 2000s cannabis company that was licensed or something in California or in any of the early states. Somewhere in the line was someone who had been doing something that they shouldn't have at some point in time.
Yeah, of course.
So it goes with the nature of truly, I mean, what this nation does and is, and it's growing, it's changing, and it's a great thing to be a part of, because ultimately it's part of the culture of our nation as well. It's not just the culture of an industry. It's how our nation is finally kind of changing and starting to recognize something. So it's, at least to me, it's showing a positive aspect of change to our society as a whole. That we're willing to look at something and say, hey, this could be something that actually helps people and saves us in a way.
Well, I'm on your page when it comes to, I know you got to go, so I'm going to wrap this up. But when it comes to education, I believe that is the most powerful piece here. And again, I believe it goes back to our rural communities and where do we hit the mass public when it comes globally, right? This isn't a U.S. concern. This is a global.
Absolutely.
And so being able to really address it on a global scale and call light to what capabilities are out there and what's happening. So if anybody wants to get a hold of you, Dane, how do they get a hold of you? And I want to thank you before you do that so much for coming on. I'm always so impressed by you and what you're doing with yourself. I can't wait to come down. Your team's really lucky to have you on board. And so congratulations on your new role. But
yeah. Thanks, Mandy. It's always a great time to talk to you, and people can you can connect with me. You can go to our website at utcannabis.org, and you can reach out to us there. You can also follow up with me. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Dane Hoffman. I'm pretty sure I'm one of the only people with that name right now. So, and
I lost you. I don't know if anybody else can hear you or not. See if he comes back here. I don't know if he can hear me. Okay, well, anyways, I think we lost him. We're going to sign off for the day. We'll be back tomorrow. We've got lots going on. Anyway, have a good day and we'll check out.